As a fan of Two Steps from Hell, I sometimes took their music as my mixing reference. After mixing, however, I always found mine were not even close to the reference. And it is hard to dig deeper, since these are two different pieces of music. Today, I remade one of the music from arrangement to mixing and finally to mastering, so that I'm able to make a better comparison. I'd like to share how it sounds and what I learned from this whole process. It's Empire of Angels. I chose this part. It's actually a typical part for epic music. Part 1 is a strings part, and part 2 comes the brass and other stuff, everything, which suddenly drags the loudness to extreme. Well, let's first of all take a listen to the comparison. And take a listen to my version before and after mixing. This is what I think of the highlights of the original mix. 1. Huge loudness. 2. Very rich treble and bass, meanwhile maintaining the acoustic nature of the orchestra. As we know, gaining EQ too much will easily make the sound twisted, losing its acoustic nature, and then it doesn't sound like the instrument we used now. The sound feel of the orchestra isn't traditional, but powerful. The percussion in the mix isn't dominant. In other words, it doesn't rely on percussion to produce the power. If you are familiar with today's libraries, you will find no problem at all to pick some powerful percussion lines. Here are my library and FX this time. Hollywood strings, Hollywood brass, synth bass, synth, percussion. Well, it's not my main goal this time to mimic the percussion line, and I didn't get it close enough. For audio effects, Ozone 7 and Waves Renaissance series. Here are 7 points I'd like to share. 1. Export all tracks from different mic positions. It's common to have multi-mic positions featured in today's libraries. For example, we have 4 sets of mics in Hollywood strings. Export all of them individually before starting mixing. Don't only export your favorite one. Don't rush to adjust them during composing and bounce to only one stereo for mixing. It would be easy to tweak every mic during mixing, and even if you want to insert effects to a closed mic, it could be still possible. 2. Cut off useless frequencies as much as possible. Well, someone might think I should keep the orchestra part intact, or the orchestra should sound just like recorded. Well, in fact, this is modern hybrid and epic music. There are so many instruments. For example, the bass of violins is important in solo, but maybe useless in such epic music. The mix could easily get vague if you don't touch your EQ. Let's take a listen. We might still have a question here. How do I know from what frequency should I start cutting? Here's my advice. If you hear a sound has been severely twisted, which means you are cutting off its core frequency, you need to take a step back unless you know what you're doing. Last thing, cutting rather than gaining. I didn't gain any frequency much on any single track this time. Be careful with gaining. It could easily turn your sound twisted if doing it improperly. 3. Spend more time in automation. Considering its loudness, this music must be under huge compression, then must sound flat without much automation. Volume, bypass of EQ, reverb send amount, they're all worth trying. Reverb. I guess some of you might have some questions like, these are what I've been thinking about. Number one is that, do I need some reverb since I already have surround or far mic samples? And do I need big reverbs like hall or small reverb like small room or plate? Is it right to have big reverb rather than small since we are working on orchestral music? Is convolution reverb always better than algorithmic for orchestral music, considering the IRs come from famous concert halls? First of all, here's what I did in the mix. I sent both big and small reverbs, more for small and less for big. About the questions above, here's what I think. I don't think far or surround mics will replace the reverb effects. In fact, far or surround mics in different libraries usually differ. For example, the surround in Hollywood strings sounds not that far, while the NI strings sounds really far. Sometimes you don't like the far sound, which means you will level down the far track. In this case, you might need send extra reverbs. For small reverb, I got a comparison here. You might find the dry horn sounds a little bit dull. Adding the whole reverb didn't change that. What it did just putting the sound inside large space, but it didn't change the dullness of the dry sound. The way to play seems adding a little bit chorus-like polish on the drive, which made it less dull. This might more like 2 steps from hell. For convolution, I at first used convolution. The IR was a LA hole, and it sounded great during mixing, especially when I solo a track, and it sounded amazing like you were actually hearing it playing in that hole. And when I start mastering, however, I found my mix a little bit muddy. Then I tried changing the convolution to an algorithmic hole, and it fixed. Why? In my guess, algorithmic reverb is about math. Math has patterns, thus making it sound more clear. This taught me a lesson that convolution reverbs don't necessarily the best choice for orchestral music. Last, I EQ'd the width of the reverb. Basically, lower down the bass. If your bass has much reverb in the mix, your music could easily get muddy. For the richness of high frequencies in 2 steps from here, we all know we need to boost the treble. But don't forget your exciter and tape effects. This could be where the magic comes from. Don't focus only on your EQ. 6. Different effects for different buses. I put short strings into a bus, long strings in another bus, and brass in the third bus. You might like to have some effects inserted on master track. Here I suggest trying inserting them on different buses. Take exciter for example, you will find out giving more excitement for strings and still sounds great, while giving only a little for brass and starts harsh. If you put such exciter on master track, it'd be hard to make a choice how much excitement you need. 7. Insert a maximizer and an EQ boosting the treble on master track before starting mixing. Considering the loudness and richness of treble in 2 steps from hell, this is a good reference during your mixing. Delete them when you finish your mix and ready to bounce for mastering. Thank you for watching. Thumbs up if you think this is useful.